in one part of your thesis, you were looking at the writings of Aristotle and Aquinas on happiness. Let's see what you can remember about Aristotle and Aquinas and happiness. What's that left you with?
Oh gosh.
With regards to issues of Christianity and faith and engagement.
So maybe if I just backtrack a little bit.
Yeah, go for it.
Through all of my thinking around issues of poverty and wider creation care, it very soon became very obvious to me that I could give my money to other charities, I could campaign and should campaign and call on governments and businesses to put in policies and practices that are good, but that actually I also had to take responsibility for my own life and recognise the way that my life was impacting other people through high resource consumption and not living carefully. And so all the way through my adult life, I've been trying to find ways of living in ways that take care of this world that God has made and that does as little damage as possible and maybe even helps, and that thinks about how much resources I use, how much CO2 I emit, and tries to live in other ways. So I was doing that. I was already on the path doing that. And then at one point, after I'd left the EA and had more of a portfolio type life, I was contacted by someone who asked me to write, someone from HTB around Alpha, asked me to write a resource for them and with them around simplicity and simple living. I'd never not come across this term before, but as I did the reading for writing this resource, I realized that it encapsulated what I was trying to do. So this notion of simple living or simplicity, I realized was what other people called what I had been trying to do. So when it came to my thesis, I wanted to look at how do we live well as Christians, as followers of Jesus in a consumer culture? And does this idea of simplicity, does that notion have something to offer as an answer, by way of some sort of answer? When it comes to consumerism, a lot of consumerism is around the search for happiness, for perfection, for self-fulfillment. And Aristotle and Aquinas use this word eudaimonia, which can be translated as happiness, could also be translated as flourishing. And that seemed to capture the kind of word that consumerism is trying to seek after, and that we're all trying to seek after, that when it's in a healthy way. So then I wanted to explore, okay, how do they deal with that? Aristotle, but particularly Aquinas from a Christian perspective. So that then led me to thinking around how Aquinas approaches the virtues, and that actually we find fulfillment and flourishing and happiness by living a virtuous life, which for Aquinas, that sounds to us in our modern day of living a virtuous life sounds really boring and what have you. But for Aquinas, living a virtuous life is about the fullness of life, a rich living. And so that was the sort of thing that I wanted to explore.
Yeah, fascinating. So yes, eudaimonism, my PhD really focused on desire.
Okay.
Some agency. So why in particular evangelical imaginations have been co-opted through their worship practices.
Yeah.
So this issue of virtue, I didn't look at Aristotle at all, but just discovering again, I was mostly interested in the epiphenomena, because I'm a pastor, a minister. How does this work in everyone's life day to day? And when it comes to virtue, finding that most people think so. Virtue is, if I don't go to 55 clubs for my children, if we don't take 5 international holidays, if we don't, I have done some damage to them. They're disadvantaged in the globalized world. I haven't been a good parent. It's interesting what's underneath that drive to consume, to be a good parent. And that place, as soon as you start saying that, but this is what good parents do, don't they?
Yeah.
That's the place of virtue, isn't it? Wouldn't use the word virtue, but What have you found day to day in everyday life with Christians?
In terms of the parenting?
Yeah, just where virtue plays out, because people don't walk around using that word and they would think it was, a bit sanctimonious and over spiritual. But, we still, I guess, let me frame it this way. It's usually about good. What does it mean to be good?
Mm.
What's a good life? What's a good life for my kids? If you're going to relate in any shape or form to your family and community, that's what I found. That's where the rubber hits the road, and people make most of their decisions about what they're going to do and how they're going to spend their
certainly parenting is where the rubber hits the road. And actually, if I could bring it right down to the miniature, I found that it all coalesced, all came together in the lunchbox. What do I give my kids? I want it to be healthy, but I want it to be to be environmentally friendly, not to have harmed the planet. So something that might be healthy for them, like eating almonds, then actually isn't very good for the wider natural world. So I want it needs to hold those. I don't want it to be too weird, because I want them to feel a bit normal as well. So I want to put in the occasional frube or something that I might not normally do, because I don't want them to feel that they're standing out too much. And it all needs to happen on a budget, because at that point, certainly, I didn't have much money at all. So all of those things together, I found that lunchboxes was where it all came together. But if I can come back to Aristotle, I got there because as I was thinking around simplicity and listening to some of the research that I was doing around that, I began to see that there are real dangers in how we respond to consumerism. We can either jump in wholesale and become completely consumer focused in our lives and in our churches, or we can do a massive reaction where we go off into some enclave and don't relate to our culture at all. And we've got these extremes of loving the world too much, but also not loving the world enough. So we don't want to go into a Gnostic denial of material goods, whilst we also don't want to jump wholesale into complete hedonistic, narcissistic consumerism. And so there's this middle line, if you like, between poverty and riches. And I began to see that the path of simple living was about walking a middle line and holding these number of different tensions in balance. And Aristotle talks about the golden mean, the via media, that middle path, which then Aquinas picks up. So it was that concept that got me onto Aristotle and then onto Aquinas. And with the virtues, the ones that were key for me were holding together the virtues of temperance and justice. So temperance is what we might see reflected in moves to respond to consumerism by sort of seeing the negative trappings of consumerism in a busy life and too much possessions, and so it harms us. But if our response is only about that, then essentially it's consumeristic, it's still narcissistic. Whereas for Aquinas, he would say that temperance is only temperance when it's rooted in justice. And so my attempts around living more simply, yes, are partly because actually I get a better life when I'm not so focused on possessions and on money and on those sorts of things. But also that if it's only about that, then it's not Christian temperance. My simple living is rooted in a desire to live more simply so that others can simply live, and to be thinking about other issues of poverty and my impact on the wider natural world. So it was holding those virtues together particularly that were important for me.